following subject matter is real and only intended for mature audiences. Discretion is advised.
People are dead after deputies say a man went on a shooting rampage.
I knew a week before she died I was going to kill her.
I can tell you the scene out there is absolutely horrific.
Nobody knows where this individual may strike next.
This is 10-Minute Murder.
Welcome to 10-Minute Murder, brief and bingeable true crime. I'm Joe, I'm the host, and I'm really excited that you're here today. If you're brand new, first of all, welcome. Super happy that you're here. And make sure you're subscribed to 10-Minute Murder. Wherever you're listening right now, no matter what the platform is, there's a way to subscribe. Find that, hit that button, and in the future, you will miss no episodes. And I think it's been long established that women make very good investigators. They're able to find people and places and things, especially on social media. Like if you were to tell someone, hey, I met this person and here's a little bit about their life, just a small snippet, and they kind of look like this. Women can find that person. And I don't understand how it's possible, but it obviously is because it's a thing. So what I'm asking you to do is put that power to work. Find 10-Minute Murder on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you want to cheat and use the links during the show notes of this episode, you can do that. But if you would rather do it the old-fashioned way, like you're stalking your ex, you can find 10-Minute Murder on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And now to today's story. If you try to locate a town called Wineville on a map, it looks like it doesn't really exist. But if you look closer, you'll spot two streets, Wineville Avenue and South Wineville Avenue. It's in Jurupa Valley, Riverside County. Nothing else is left of the Southern California town where something so horrifying happened in the 1920s that it caused the small farming community to change the name of their hometown, which I guess was a smart thing to do because nowadays Wineville is basically a synonym for serial killer Gordon Northcott and his heinous crimes. Born in Canada at the turn of the century, Gordon Stewart Northcott immigrated to Los Angeles with his parents, Sarah Louise and Cyrus George, in the mid-1920s. Not much is publicly known about Gordon's upbringing, but it was said that he had 3-inch-long hair all over his body. It earned him the nickname the Ape Boy, which perfectly fit the view that people had of criminals back then. They were perceived as evolutionary throwbacks, regressive examples of humanity in its original bestial state. In other words, ape-like. Despite the lack of public records, it's pretty clear that Gordon did not have the easiest childhood. According to his sister, Winifred, doctors can verify that Gordon's mind has never been just right. He suffered some head injuries, one after falling on the ice, which left Gordon with hemorrhages. On top of that, his own niece, Jessie, allegedly tried to kill him as a little boy by shoving him down through the hole of the loft of a barn. However, we don't know for sure what exactly the injuries sustained by Gordon were at that time, but he lived. In addition, Gordon's nephew, Sanford Clark, later recalled that Gordon had gotten himself into trouble in Canada due to his questionable behavior, and Gordon himself claimed that his father sexually abused him at the age of 10. Yet Cyrus also reportedly did his best to save his son and displayed almost dog-like passivity, allowing Gordon to dominate him completely. On top of that, Sarah idolized her little boy and lavished him with all of her love, which sounds great, of course, but in the end, she did way too much for Gordon. Basically, there were no healthy relationships or any kind of balance in the Northcott household. When Gordon's parents bought him a plot in Wineville to build a chicken ranch, the idea was to keep him out of trouble, give him something to do, something worthwhile to do with his free time. Little did they know that Gordon had no intentions to grow and become a better person. On the contrary, things were about to get much, much worse, and quickly. In 1926, 19-year-old Gordon moved permanently to the ranch and invited 13-year-old Sanford to come with him for at least a little while. Gordon's nephew was absolutely thrilled about the idea at first, and arrangements were made. It was thought that Sanford would gain valuable life experience working on the ranch and attending school in the U.S. However, that was not what Gordon had in mind. The two young men and Gordon's father built the ranch together. Soon they had a house, a garage, and 2 units to keep chickens. But as much as Gordon had been hitting nails into the planks, he was also hitting Sanford with anything he could get a hold of, and for no reason. In addition, Gordon kept his nephew from the outside world. Sanford was not allowed to play, make friends, go to school, or basically leave the ranch at all. The only reason Gordon had asked the boy to join him at the ranch in the first place was to make Sanford his personal toy. And the beatings alone were not enough. The boy was also brutally raped by his uncle almost every night. On some occasions, Sanford was forced to take an active role in sodomy. And yet, nothing seemed to satisfy Gordon's growing thirst. He needed more. At first, Gordon began coaxing young boys out to the ranch with the promise of a day's wage for helping out, making up stories, pretending to know their parents, anything to get them there. Then once they got there, Gordon used and assaulted the boys in similar ways that he had done Sanford. Once he was finished with them, he drove them back into town again. However, at some point, his victims began to disappear. One day, Gordon showed up with an unknown Hispanic teen. He proceeded to lock the boy up in the chicken coop, as he often did with Sanford, and let him out only to rape him. This went on for a while, a whole week, before Gordon decided that he had had enough of him. So he shot the boy to death and decapitated him. Sanford, who had had a break from abuse during this time, was forced to help conceal the crime by burning the head in an outdoor oven and then dumped the rest of the body on the side of a road. Some months later, on March 10th, Gordon abducted another young boy named Walter Collins Jr. He took him to the ranch, he was tortured, raped, and finally murdered with an axe after a little over a week. His body was burned in a grave with an entire barrel of quicklime. At some point later, Gordon dug up the body, burned it again, and scattered the remains. Walter's disappearance received nationwide attention, and the Los Angeles County Police Department followed up on hundreds of tips, but without success. Then the case took an unexpected turn. 5 months after Walter went missing, a boy claiming to be Walter was found in DeKalb, Illinois. The police organized a public reunion, hoping to negate some of the bad publicity they'd received. However, at the reunion, Christine Collins claimed that the boy was not Walter. Still, Police Captain J.J. Jones urged Christine to take the boy home to, quote, try him out for a couple of weeks, as if human beings are some type of merchandise. So Christine, doing like she was told, did take the imposter home, but after 3 weeks, she still insisted that that boy is not Walter. The real Walter, as I mentioned, was killed, burned, buried, dug up, burned again, and then scattered. Even though Christine had her son's dental records proving that this boy was not Walter, she was committed to the psychiatric ward of Los Angeles County Hospital under a code that means someone is deemed difficult or an inconvenience. Not really the words that should be used of a mother trying to find out what happened to her son. Finally, during Christine's incarceration, Captain Jones questioned the boy, who admitted he was actually 12-year-old Arthur Hutchins Jr., a runaway from Illinois. Arthur said he'd come up with a plan to impersonate Walter when someone had mentioned his resemblance to the missing boy. Apparently, his motive was to get to Hollywood to meet his favorite actor, Tom Mix. Meanwhile, Gordon continued what he was doing. He abducted the Winslow brothers, Lewis and Nelson, on May 16th and took them to the ranch. They were both raped and again murdered with an axe. This time, Gordon had also forced his young victims to write letters to their parents to throw people off of his trail. To make matters even worse, all this time, while Gordon had been going out and raping and killing people on the ranch and forced his nephew to help, Sarah Northcott had never had anything bad to say about her son. She still idolized him in a way where she seemed to have worshipped Gordon as some kind of god. Everything he did was still perfect to her. So much so that on one occasion, Sarah even murdered for her son. According to her later testimony, Sarah went to visit Gordon on the ranch, where he had 9-year-old Walter Collins trapped in his chicken coop. She admitted to participating in killing the boy and then later getting rid of his body together with Sanford. Luckily, there was one family member that started to become suspicious about what was really happening on the ranch, and that was Gordon's niece and Sanford's sister, Jessie. They had been sending letters, always saying that they were having a wonderful time and everything was just rainbows and sunshine. Jessie, however, knew her uncle and didn't buy it. She needed to see it with her own eyes, and so she traveled to Wineville in 1928, where Sanford told her the truth to her face about her uncle's crimes. Jessie returned to Canada 1 week later and immediately informed the American consulate. Of course, at this point, Gordon's mother had already warned him, and the two had escaped. It didn't take long to find the runaways, though, and on September 19th, 1928, Gordon and his mother were arrested in Vernon, British Columbia, Canada. Sarah kept going back and forth with her willingness to cooperate. At one point, she confessed and then retracted her confession just to confess again. In the end, Sarah was not put on trial as she pleaded guilty. She was sentenced to life in prison for her involvement in Walter Collins' death and paroled after just 12 years in 1944. And even though Sanford Clark participated in some of the horrors on the ranch, he was labeled a victim by prosecutors. A victim that was terrified of his captor and thus unwillingly being a part of Gordon's crimes. He was sentenced to 5 years at the Whittier State School and released after 23 months. Afterward, Sanford went on to become a longtime pollster worker, husband, father, and just an all-around good man. He eventually wrote a book entitled The Road Out of Hell, Sanford Clark and the True Story of the Wineville Murders, about his experiences on the Wineville Ranch. When it comes to Gordon himself, it was speculated that he may have raped, tortured, and killed as many as 20 boys. There wasn't enough evidence to charge him with all of that. He was only charged with the murders of the unidentified headless Hispanic boy, the brothers Lewis and Nelson Winslow. On February 8, 1929, the 27-day trial ended with Gordon Northcott found guilty on all counts. 5 days later, he was sentenced to death and was hanged at San Quentin on October 2, 1930. He was 23 years old. The gruesome murders understandably gained tremendous media attention to Wineville, and not in a good way, obviously. Soon enough, the case was known as the Wineville Chicken Coop Murders. Townspeople could not bear to be associated with the heinous crimes, and so, a month after Gordon's execution, on November 1st, 1930, the town changed its name to Mira Loma, which is part of Jurupa Valley today. Still, even though Gordon Northcott was now gone and some tried to forget he ever existed in the first place, the families of his victims didn't really have the closure they wished due to the inability to find intact bodies. Little Walter's mother, Christine Collins, still hoped that her son had survived. And why did she believe so strongly that Walter was still alive? Because she had visited Gordon in prison, and the murderer told her that he had nothing to do with Walter's disappearance. Christy trusted Gordon's word and continued to search for Walter for the rest of her life before dying without ever knowing her son's true fate. Thanks for listening today, and before you go, subscribe. Make sure you're subscribed to this podcast, and that way you won't miss any future episodes. Connect with 10 Minute Murder on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Links for that are in the show notes of this episode, or just type it into the search bar in whatever app you're trying to find the show in. It'll pop right up. And lastly, if you have friends that you think might be into brief true crime stories like this, let your friends know about 10 Minute Murder. Be safe. Thanks for listening, and have a good night.